Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm excited to be here with Dan Flansburg, who is the owner of Flansburg Construction. We're located in Hamilton, New Jersey. Really appreciate you coming on the show, Dan. Welcome to Builder Stories.
Thanks for having me.
Well, why don't you kick us off with a little bit of background, who you are, how'd you get into construction, what led you to own a construction business?
Construction for me started off at an early age, working with my father. He was a deck builder and general contractor in like the central Jersey area. And 12, 13 years old, I would go to work with him, carry lumber, sometimes help, sometimes get in the way, sometimes get yelled at. At that age, I worked kind of when I wanted to, but I always had an interest in construction, carpentry. I was always had a lot of aptitude in like wood shop class. I was always the one that got to do like the special projects with the wood shop teacher because all the other kids are, kind of behind, and I wanted to use the more advanced tools and things like that. And then also there was an entrepreneurial side to things. I had a lawn cutting business at 12, 13, 14 years old when I didn't have to go to work with my father. I would cut lawns and things like that. So I always liked that freedom of being able to control my time, being able to control the client relationship. So fast forward a little bit, I went to some community college and things after high school. Kind of was a knucklehead in my late teens, early 20s, and lacked direction and things. So did a few different things in that late teens, early 20s, and then ultimately ended up coming back to construction, carpentry. Ended up in my early 20s working with my father again. He had his own business. And this time it worked, we got along a lot better. I learned a ton of things. And I've shared before, he's very good at the construction part, but he wasn't, he'll self-admittedly, he wasn't the best business person in the world, and, struggled with being able to charge enough, struggled with keeping track of things. So we worked together for about 5 years. That ended. And then I went and worked for a few other companies, all the while kind of in the back of my head thinking I was going to start my own company at some point. So my wife and I, we have been married since I was 25. So even early on in our marriage, we knew we were going to start a company at some point. So working for other people, I worked for a couple high-end builders in the area, doing remodeling and building. In the meantime, too, I went to school for project management at community college, took some courses on contract law, just basic things, while simultaneously running jobs. And then 2011, we ultimately made the decision for me to go out on my own and, started off really small, just me, truck, tools, and just kind of kept it really simple, did really small jobs. I didn't have any formal business plan at that point. It was just more or less, I'm just going to take the jobs as they come, try our best not to lose money, and see what happens.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So sounds like you grew up, seeing your dad, being an entrepreneur, grew up around construction, got a lot of experience along the way, and that gave you the skills and the desire to go start your own, which is awesome. So what does the business look like today? Like what types of jobs do you do? How big are those jobs? What's the major focus?
So the business has certainly evolved since 2011. Right now, currently, we're a team of 12 people, and that consists of me as the owner. My wife is still involved. She's not technically an owner, but she oversees the financial part of the business, which has been a key. So I think with the listeners out there, just letting them know, having somebody who's in control of the financials, who's savvy, who can see things before they happen, type of a thing, who is against spending money that you don't have. I think it's crucial to have that person in your corner, especially if you're not a financially driven type person, and a lot of contractors are not. So she still does the books and does the financial oversights. That's her only role in the business. She doesn't get into design or anything. And then we have a lead designer, assistant designer, and then another designer that does kitchens and baths. We have a production manager, three project managers, and then a couple of lead carpenters where we self-perform some things, and another person that does our marketing and things. Yeah, our projects, I would say they average between a couple 100,000 up on over to 1 million. We do a lot of kitchens, bathrooms, large scale renovations, additions, that sort of thing. And yeah, the last 5 or 6 years have been a lot of growth, and not only staff wise, but also growth, just getting better as a company.
Sure. So I'm curious. I mean, again, you said kind of early on, you just sort of taking whatever odd jobs, whatever projects came your way. Now you're, doing some jobs that are over $1 million. I mean, tell us, like, what was like the progression of, that for you over the last several years? Like, how did you kind of grow into, taking on these larger jobs and kind of building out your team? Like, because a lot of people, I see tons of people, they kind of start off just same situation very early on, just kind of scrapping to try to find anything to keep the business, alive and going. So how did you kind of like, where were those big sort of pivotal, milestones or turning points for you that helped you really kind of catapult?
I would say, part of it was, so the first year was just me and just doing stuff by myself. And after about a year, I hired someone. And as in many things in life, usually it's going through something difficult or a challenge that helps, right? So when I worked for somebody else, I fell off of a structure that we were framing, unfortunately, landed on my feet, but shattered my heel.
Ooh.
So I was young. I was like 30 years old at the time. And, I healed quickly. But after that, I'm like, you know what? I got to do some things differently here and learn some things. So fast forward to when I had my own company, I hired somebody after about a year, but then also from doing that work, I ended up with a hernia. So I had like a 6 week period where I was out, not able to physically do the work. So I had to learn during that time to be able to delegate just on a small scale, just, delegate some of the carpentry and let go of some of the things that I was doing every day. So that was one piece that helped me be able to see, hey, you know what? It's actually nice when, I can focus on the business and let somebody else do the physical aspect of it. As much as I loved doing the physical aspect of it, and, I was pretty good at it as well, watching somebody else do it, getting results through someone else, and watching, the reward that they have as well, that started to resonate with me a little bit. And then fast forward a couple years, for 3 or 4 years, we stayed at the size where it was just me and two like lead carpenter type guys in the field. So I was doing all of the selling, estimating, any admin stuff. I was doing that at night in a little office in a corner of our attic. Uh, and that, a year or two of doing that got old pretty quickly. And I kind of said to myself and to my wife, I've either got to learn how to grow this into a regular business, or I might as well just go back and work for somebody else. Because at that point, I was probably making what I would have made per year as a salary working for somebody else, but I was spending 50% more time than I would have been spending. So if you add up the hours and you do the math, maybe I was making $25 an hour or something. And at the time, back then, if I went to work for somebody else, I would have made 30 or $35 an hour. So it, you have to get some return on the investment of time and everything.
Sure. Did you ever reach a point where, you realize that, like, either the client wasn't a good fit or the project wasn't a good fit, and like you started to be able to kind of, walk away from those that you just didn't think would be a good fit for the business, and sort of be a little bit more selective?
Yes, that was something I had to learn. Yeah, because early on you take whatever you can get. So probably 4 or 5 years in, I stopped messing around with some of the smaller jobs or some of the like roof repairs and things like that that just were just out of the wheelhouse of what I could really do at the time, and focus more on like kitchen and bath remodeling, additions. And that's something of note too, is back then, even it was when it was just me and a couple people, we would get like I remember how happy I was the first time we got like our first small addition, and just thinking, all right, I'm going to do the best job we possibly can on this, make this client happy, and see what happens with that. And what that turned into, doing something at the neighbor's house and the other neighbor's house, and then that neighbor referring us. So starting with those types of jobs and not turning them away type of a thing, or saying, this is not good enough for me or something. There's
Sure.
a balance, right?
And when you think about like who your ideal client is, like how do you define, what you're looking for, and are there red flags that you look for, in choosing not to take on a client?
There's a few things we look for. I would say, the ideal client for us is someone that has lived in their home for a little while. They're staying in their home for more than 10 years. They're very financially stable. I would say 90 to 95% of our clients are paying for the projects in, they're not borrowing money to pay for the projects. Uh, some of them are retirement age or very close to it and paid off their home. So they paid very little for it, um, you know, 20 years ago, and they have either they don't have a mortgage or they have a very low interest rate. So we look for that. And also there's some other clients too that are the demographic where they're a little younger, young kids, things like that. They're looking for they're not only looking for quality construction, but they they don't have time to buy the tile or pick out, go to the cabinet supplier and order the cabinets. So the clients that come to us, they want a full service company, somebody that's going to manage everything from beginning to end, and get them involved as needed as they make their selections and things. But yeah, so there's a few different types of ideal clients we have.
Sure. So maybe walk us through, like, what is your kind of what's the process look like from someone hearing about you, finding out about you? Are they going to your website? Are how are you kind of, calling them, qualifying it, and then ultimately, what's that process look like for, design, estimate, getting them all the way into the construction?
So that's something that's definitely evolved especially the last 6 or 7 years. The way that works is they typically call the office, or they fill out a form on our website, which can come from various different places, whether a Google search or a referral, and we track all of that as well. So they'll fill out a form on the website or call, and then we have a pretty it's simple, but we have questions that we like to ask on a phone call. We try not to over qualify on that phone call, but we always do a phone call about 15 or 20 minutes to see if we're the right type of company for them. They're the right type of client for us. It's a good mutual fit. And then if it does seem like they're looking for our type of company, then we'll schedule an in-home consultation. And that's an hour consultation. We schedule that. We go out to see them, get a general idea of what the project is. And then again, if we have a bunch of questions that we ask and qualifying that we do, especially on that in-home visit to see if they're a good fit. And if it seems like they are, then we'll bring that information back to the office. We'll write up what we call a design agreement. And then for the second in-person visit, we require them to come to our office to review the design agreement. And then if they want to move forward with us, they'll sign that, give us a deposit, and then we begin design work. And we have a very extensive pre-construction process as well. So we, start with some preliminary designs and then, boil that down, go through selections, and then, have trade visits and final estimating, final budget review, contract review with the client. Obviously, a lot of steps in there that I didn't mention, but we've spent a lot of time, especially the last few years, like I mentioned, really developing not only the intake process and the questions that we ask, but also, making sure that they're right for us. And then once they sign with us, then, a very detailed process after that as well.
Sure. You mentioned earlier that, you actually have designers on staff. Have you always done the in-house design, or was that a change at some point that you decided to bring it in-house?
Started doing that in 2019. That kind of happened. It wasn't necessarily a really thought out plan. It was at the time I was, struggling a little bit with staff, and we were right at that point where we were starting to grow a little bit in 2019, and I was struggling with filling the production management position, and just in general. So I ended up hiring someone back then that I actually ended up hiring her initially as the production coordinator, and she had a design background, and it ended up where that wasn't the best seat for her, and we got somebody else to do the production coordination, and she started doing design. She had some sales background, so it was an opportunity to let somebody else do sales and design, and it worked well for a while doing it that way. So
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't quite by design, but it's kind of evolved that way.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, your website looks awesome. You got some really great looking work, professional photos. Like, curious, like, at what point did you really start kind of investing in marketing? Like, when did you build your first website? Like, how did you kind of your marketing initiatives get launched, and how far in were you?
So the first website was very very rudimentary. I think it was that was back in like 2012 or 13. I was like at a job, and the guy from Yellow Book stopped by, or I think it's called Haibu now or something, and they're like, "Oh, we'll build you a website," and it was terrible. The marketing they did was terrible, and it was just not what we needed. So fast forward to about 2018, 2019. Um, that's when we hired like a real website builder to build our website. That's where I really started to see the value in investing in real marketing, in a real SEO company that really listens to you and gets your client profile and your targets and everything. So yeah, that happened around that 2018, 2019 time period. And then also, you know, that's when I really started to see the value in investing in paying someone to do the photography, um, and just, yeah, getting on things like Google reviews and other reviews, and just really getting that, the online profile strong. And also, obviously, we always want to keep the word of mouth and the referral pipeline going, but just the importance of having a good online presence as well.
Sure, and I know it can take a long time to really build that presence and to create the, all the content and getting everything built out on the website and like seeing the actual, marketing, impact. I mean, how long and what did you sort of start to see, or when did you start seeing like that you knew that marketing and your website and the reviews, like, could you tell at some point when leads started like picking up, or the, kind of you're getting better quality, leads and customers? Like, was there any sort of moment where you knew that it was worth the investment and you wanted to keep going?
Yeah, I think, I think marketing in general, sometimes it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. So I know that, early on when I paid a professional company to build the website, that was like the first like aha moment, like, where I was like, wow, this is way better than what was done before. And yeah, we had the Haibu one, and then in between we built our own on Wix or something. And that the one on Wix was terrible. That was had like iPhone pictures on there, and then after, we had a professional company build it, it was 10 times better. Um, so yeah, I think that's when I first started to see the value of it. And we went through a few different marketing companies before we found one that was really a good fit for us. Uh, but yeah, it's some of those Google campaigns and things like that. Sometimes you spend money on them, you see results for a little while, and then you don't. As somebody who is comes from the hands-on world, I struggle with that sometimes. With there's not tangible results. Um, or not necessarily. Yeah, there's tangible results because when the leads start coming in, but it's tough waiting for it and writing those checks sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Would you say, I mean, I can tell, like, on your website, you've got, a lot of, you've got the home remodeling cost guide, you've got, case studies, frequently asked questions, you've defined your processes. Like, it seems like you've really tailored a lot of your content towards educating, your customers or future customers. Like, do you think that strategy has helped? Like, can you tell when somebody comes into your process, like whether they have, really read your website and kind of consumed some of that content, watched some of your videos? Like, is that a noticeable difference?
oh, absolutely. Yeah, that does help quite a bit. And we can really tell when we ask some of our qualifying questions how much research they've really done on it. So you can tell when somebody hasn't on the other side of that as well. Like, you know, folks will call and say, "Hey, I have a insurance repair job. I have a hole in my sheetrock in the living room ceiling." And if you go on our website, there's nothing that indicates that we do insurance repairs. So, and then contrast that with where you get the client that's like, hey, we want to do an in-law suite addition. We want to hire a company that's design build. They already know. They've already, watched all the YouTube videos and as well. I think that's something worth noting. Uh, Video. We started doing that maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, and that's been huge. Um, just in simple form of just communicating, how projects evolve, and letting it builds trust, and letting clients see, hey, they took on this large scale renovation. We can see the before, we can see during, we can see, okay, there were some challenges here with the foundation that got fixed, and then here's the finished product, the final walkthrough. Video has been a game changer. I think any remodeler, or contractor that's doing mid to upper end remodeling should definitely be doing video.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, video is king. It's I think people want to hear from other people that have, gone through the same situation. They've gone through the same process. Like, what was it like to them? I think there's just that inherent trust when you hear from someone else versus you just hear from the company or salesperson, or, somebody who's got that bias, versus like, look, I was in your shoes. I hired these people. Here was the problem I had. Here's how the experience was. Here's the outcome. Like, we're extremely happy. We recommend them. I mean, like, that is so valuable. So I love seeing kind of how you guys have really embraced that, and you got it directly on your website. What other, I'm curious, like, well, how are you producing these videos? Are you doing that in house, or is that done through the marketing agency, or like?
We have a separate videographer. He does
Okay.
our videography and our photography. So yeah, he's a local guy that we met through another company. He does a couple other companies that are similar to us in the area as well. and just a young guy who's got a photography and videography business, and yeah, it's great. He does a great job.
Nice. What other types of videos are you doing beyond like just kind of those testimonial type videos?
So we do the client testimonials. We do the walkthroughs. Um, some of those I've we've been trying to do ones where it's someone other than me on the video. So we'll have like one of the designers out there explaining features of the cabinets, or we'll have our production manager out there explaining, how the client, how the process was managed, how the project was managed, and how the pieces all came together. So we try to look at it from a few different angles as far as, before, during, after, and then put all the pieces together. So some larger projects will actually do 3 to 4 sessions of video and photographs at the end of that project.
And have you always been comfortable behind video, or is that something that you had to sort of grow into?
It doesn't bother me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if you just act natural and just talk like you normally would, we don't script anything. I think you can tell when somebody scripts
Yeah.
something. It's very, you know, very mechanical and so yeah, I just try to be natural as I can be anyway in my
Yeah.
in my awkwardness.
I see a lot of people who like they know they need to, be leveraging video, but like they're they just got that fear that holds them back from just like, look, just pull it out, start recording, like just get, do it, and as you get more practice, more experience, like becomes more natural, and then you quit caring and just, look, it's be raw, be real, be just authentic and be who you are. And don't worry about, did I say that right or that right? Did I stumble, stutter? Like it's who you are. And I think people really value, that natural, authentic, recording versus, something that, people think is, so perfect that it was AI that generated it.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny because I went back and looked at a video that we did a couple months ago, and I noticed a word that I said incorrectly of one of the products that we used. I used the word impervious, and I was supposed to say pervious, and I mixed it up. And who cares? You know what?
Yeah.
I know what was right, but like you said, just being natural and just letting it flow. I'm on if you're familiar with the disc scale, I'm a very high C. So my I, or, that outgoing type of personality I'm very low on that. So it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to me, but yeah, you just got to get out of your comfort zone and do it.
Sure. Do you guys use like the disc profile within your company?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody in the company has taken it. We've kind of internally just done some discussions on it and just see how we can communicate better with each other. Because yeah, we have a few that are similar to me where they're C, D, or CS, and we have others that are, very high I, and just the differences in that and how to approach each other and when to approach each other, that sort of thing. It's been really helpful actually.
Sure. I mean, look, Dan, you've had a lot of success, and I know it's been a long journey for you, but like, has there been anyone, in particular, like, have you hired coaches or worked with, any groups or anything that like you would say has like made a really, impactful, kind of just helped you to grow along the years?
One of the biggest things we did was in 2019 we joined Remodelers Advantage, and that was a it was a funny time to join an organization like that. So 2019, late 2019, we signed up, and then we did like they called it Jumpstart or something back then, where it's like your introductory teaching where you go through some of their programs. So that was online, and then of course 2020, as you know, March of 2020, that's when everything went crazy with COVID. So that we were brand new members. Uh, so the meetings were online, and I remember, there was this one woman who used to be a facilitator for them. Her name is Judith Miller. She was very financially focused, and she was all about the books and keeping track of your finances and things, and that really impacted me early on, and my wife, who I mentioned. her and Judith were kind of kindred spirits. So they spent some time together. So I think joining RA was definitely one of the best business decisions we ever made. And at that point, we were doing about a million a year. Um, so much, about a quarter of the size we are now. And, we had some issues going on. Um, but we were still slightly profitable at that point. But that joining RA helped me to really see past kind of, where I was at the time and be able to see, okay, there's growth opportunities here. I can expand the team a little bit. I can do it responsibly, add team members, and eventually, get myself out of project management and you know, doing some of the day-to-day things and kind of not graduate, but improve and start selling more. That's when I realized I really needed to learn how to go through a sales process and marketing. That was where we started to really refine things and really take a look at marketing. I think that's the biggest thing with RA is, you have all your company financials and you take a look at your company and then you bear all in front of these other business owners and you look at it, you look at each other's financials and org charts and things and make suggestions and you try to help one another. And that's the thing I love about it is we're all there to A, help each other, B, get better and grow, as leaders, as business owners, and who wants to work 80, 90 hours a week. So that's the other thing it's taught me is, sometimes a peer will have to say to each other, hey, why are you working 70 hours a week? You should delegate some of these things you got these great people working for you. You're not utilizing them the way you should be. So things like that, but and
Yeah.
a lot of other things.
I mean, it seems like, kind of a lot of these, kind of these pivotal moments for you have sort of kind of you keep kind of coming back to this 2019, time frame, and maybe that was,
Huh.
right when you had joined RA. I mean, I see this all the time when people surround themselves with others who, are going through those same challenges, but they're building businesses, or focused on growth and overcoming whatever issues and challenges come your way. I mean, I think that definitely must have played a huge impact on, really helping you to get even more focused on, how do I get out of the field and get really focused on the business and growing the business. I see, it's when you brought your designers in house. It's when you got, some good website and really started focusing on content. And like, it just seems like that must have played a pivotal role for your growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it helped me see the bigger picture. And I think that's the most important thing is really just getting above the business and seeing what's possible, which before that I really didn't know what was possible. I just thought I was just going to chug along and struggle for the the rest of my career, which I
Yeah.
didn't.
A lot of, again, I see this all the time. A lot of people are, they're, they're chugging away, head down, focused, just, doing the day to day and kind of having that growth. But it's like, if you don't kind of take that step back every once in a while and try to look at the forest from the trees, like you can really see the much bigger opportunity and start to plan out instead of just, month by month. Now we start looking, a couple of years out and where do we really want to take the business? And then you can kind of bring that back into, a tactical plan that, hey, we want to get to there eventually, but, what do we got to do between now and then, to set ourselves up for that success? And, seems like that's what you've been able to do.
Yep,
And,
absolutely.
and you also worked with, you had mentioned you worked with Todd DeWalt. Is that right?
We did, yes. So that was about a year and a half ago. We went through his Systematize Your Construction Business. And what that really helped us do was really think about specifically our pre-construction process and how we go through all of those steps. And what it really helped with was getting the team together, uh, doing like a process map, which we weren't really familiar with before. But I liked that process because um, it helped align the team. It helped involve everybody in making the processes. And that was something that I've learned over the last few years is you know, having somebody who's closest to the process or closest to the problem, having them develop what the solution is or develop what the process is best rather than me just dictating this is what we're going to do. But having, like I said, I have smart, capable people that work for us, and letting them be involved and having them be involved, we're going to see better results. So that was a really eye-opening experience, just getting all of that down on paper and kind of putting it into a place where we all can see it and we all can follow it. And that's we went through that his program, but we're still actively looking at that information that we got together, and we're going to use that, going forward too, to kind of rein things in a little bit more, and set up our accountabilities around a lot of those things as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's always helpful to have that kind of outsider perspective who can give you that, unbiased, just fresh look at the business. How are things, running? Where are those opportunities to improve? But, just like you said, I think it's so important when you can involve your team in these processes and in these kind of, these moments where, we know something could be improved. Let's come up with these ideas together. That will almost always lead to them taking so much more ownership over it, and then also being excited to implement the change and to kind of make it happen versus being told that they have to do something, and
Yeah.
that dictating them, just nobody, I think people would much rather feel like they get to make this impactful change, and they can sort of lead the charge and help everyone else around them versus just kind of being told what to do. So I think that's a great mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's helped me learn a lot too, as well as, about leadership and just letting people do what they're great at, and staying out of their way and giving guidance, obviously. But sometimes you just gotta let them do what they're going to do.
You know, what would you say about how, how have you focused on your team building, your culture? Like how do you kind of create, a really strong, group of people working together and really wanting to show up and do a great job versus just kind of clocking in and out?
That's definitely something that's a tough one. I think intentionally, when we hire folks, we look for attitude. Obviously you're looking for aptitude, but we're really looking for attitude. Even in, a carpenter or something like that, when we sit down and interview someone, we're asking them questions that are, we want to see kind of what their values are, how they're going to respond to pressure and stress and things like that, because it's going to come in a business like this. How are they going to respond when there's a negative client or something goes wrong? And so yeah, we're looking for attitude and culture fit. Culture fit in a sense, I think, you know, um, I'm not a micromanager in the sense I'm not going after everybody saying, what's going on with this? What are you doing with this? I try and, make that where uh, everybody's accountable, obviously, but I'm not checking in with them on a daily basis in the sense where I'm managing every little detail of what they're doing. We have one-to-ones where I can check in and see how they're doing, see if I can help with anything. But most of all, just letting them do their jobs.
Sure.
So team hiring, I think, has been one thing that's helped with that. Not me be the only one who weighs in on who we hire, but also getting other perspectives, doing separate interviews, being a little slower in our hiring. We've done really well with turnover. We have a couple people here and there that have come and gone, but we don't have big turnovers. Couple guys that have been here 10 plus years. Everybody else is, 5, 6, 7 years. So we've got a really good culture in that respect where people stay quite a while when they work here.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'm curious, what's the longer term plan here? Where do you want to take the business? Where do you want to see it in the next, 5, 10 years?
Definitely want to get to a point where, I'm still selling. Um, I want to get to a point where I'm not selling anymore, where we kind of let some other folks do that and let others grow in that area where I can focus more on business leadership. Uh, we're in the process right now of really rounding out our leadership team and getting that dialed in where somebody's accountable for each department, like, accountable for production, accountable for pre-construction, sales and marketing, and then financial. So we're working on that right now. And, you know, growth wise, we're looking to grow maybe 10 to 15% per year, year over year. And, not get too big, but get to the point where we have a nice leadership team in place. I'm kind of more on the side where I'm providing leadership and just help, removing roadblocks from people, and not in the weeds in the day to day, which we've done well with. But uh, growing the design side of things, we uh, where we evolve a little bit with our pre-design and our full designs, and just getting that dialed in. So there's a lot of things, but we're not going to change anything drastically. But we have a bunch of plans in place for the next 3 to 5 years.
That's awesome, man. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, your experience and your journey. I mean, you've been at it for a while. You've learned a lot. You've continued to make all the right moves and keep building the company. As we kind of wrap up here, I'm curious, like, what advice would you give to others who, maybe earlier on, in their journey, or just starting off, or thinking about starting a construction business? I mean, like, what do you wish that you would have known, back in 2011 when you start that you now know?
I would say early on, learn as much as you possibly can about the financial side of the business. Even if you're not a financially driven person, learning how to read a profit and loss, learning how to organize a profit and loss, learning what numbers to look for. It seems boring to a lot of people, but I think learning all of that stuff has really helped me be able to see into the future, and know if we're profitable. I mentioned, Judith Miller and my wife getting together back early on in RA, and just, learning about like WIP accounting, and, seeing how much money you actually have in real time, and not, not at the end of the year, like a lot of contractors do. They wait till they do their taxes and they're like, oh, wow, I lost money this year. Now I got to increase my prices, but being able to make those adjustments in real time. And I think, if I would have learned to do some of that stuff early on while we were at a smaller scale, I could have avoided some of those years in there. I keep mentioning 2019, but there was a few years in there, 2016, 17, 18, where I had some employees that made more money than I did those years. That's a tough pill to swallow, and that's, sometimes that's part of business growth, and you gotta, be tenacious and stick it out. But there are times, that's the point where a lot of contractors really bury themselves and get into financial trouble. Um, so I would say, learning your financials, knowing how to really job cost, I think is important. Knowing how to really estimate, and then knowing how to really say, okay, did we make any money on this job, and having a P&L, so to speak, on every job. And that's really been a game changer, and the biggest mistake that I see others like me make. And especially if you're one of those people that likes to spend money. My wife and I are both pretty frugal by nature, so I think we made it through a lot of those times, because I'm not one of those people that's going to go out and buy a $90,000 pickup truck because I think I need it. I'm going to look and see if we have the money first. But a lot of contractors are not like that, and you know, they just focus on the work, and we're just going to do a good job. That's great, but you really have to know the financial end of the business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important to really understand, the finances and construction. I mean, cash flow is everything. A lot of people don't figure that out until it's too late, and then it's too late. But yeah, that's really great advice, Dan. And I would encourage everyone to really make sure that if they are not good at the finances and accounting, and if you don't understand it, then you really better make sure somebody on your team understands it, or find a partner, bookkeeper, accountant, somebody who can really help steer you, because the longer you take to get that foundation built, the longer it's going to take for you to really take off in your business. Because without that understanding, without the discipline, without the job costing, and understanding all of how all this works, like it's very difficult to profitably scale your business. So I love that advice. I appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey, man. It's been fun to, just even the last, handful of years, being able to work with you, here at JobTread, and seeing your success. But I'm excited to see where you keep growing, and, where you take the business. I have no doubt you will be very successful.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
All right. Have a good one. See ya.
You too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.